大家好，讀你聽2.0。今日咧，我哋開一本新書啦。仍然係偵探小說裏邊。作者係 Arthur Conan Doyle 鼎鼎大名嘅 Arthur Conan Doyle 啦 ，Sherlock Holmes 嘅作者啦。呢本書咧就係佢寫 Sherlock Holmes 呢個人物嘅起步作。佢哋咧就將呢啲短篇嘅 Sherlock Holmes 咧就結集成書。之前咧就連載喺啲雜誌上面嘅，有大概10個到啦咁樣嘅短篇就結集成書，書名叫做 The Adventures of Sherlock Holmes。咁我就會讀呢啲短篇俾大家聽嘅。咁短篇裏面咧亦都會分少少章節啦，咁樣就唔會一次過讀得太長。咁今日咧就同大家分享下第一個故事 A Scandal in Bohemia。A Scandal in Bohemia。但係講呢個故事之前呢，就有少少前言啦。我呢一本書係 Penguin 嘅，Penguin 出版，咁就介紹少少呢個 Sir Arthur Conan Doyle。Sir Arthur Conan Doyle was born in Edinburgh in 1859 and died in 1930. He studied medicine in Edinburgh University and later set up practice as a doctor at Southsea.It was while waiting for patients to arrive that he began to write, and the success of his Sherlock Holmes stories are what Conan Doyle will always be remembered for. Sherlock Holmes is the world's most famous consulting detective working out of an office on Baker Street in London. The police make extensive use of his talents, and criminals tremble with fear or fury at mere mention of his name. But it is the most bizarre or thoroughly inexplicable of mysteries that Sherlock Holmes, together with his dogged companion and amanuensis, Dr. Watson, is most often drawn. Amanuensis 呢度嘅意思係一個謄寫員啦，一個記錄員啦，一個文書記啦，咁樣去用一個記錄 Sherlock Holmes 嘅行事嘅一個文書嘅身份啦，將 Dr. Watson 咁樣。好，我哋開始讀啦。A Scandal in Bohemia. To Sherlock Holmes, she is always the woman. I have seldom heard him mention her under any other name. In his eyes, she eclipses and predominates the whole of her sex.It was not that he felt any emotion akin to love for Irene Adler, for emotions, and that one particularly, were abhorrent to his cold, precise, but admirably balanced mind. He was, I take it, the most perfect reasoning and observing machine that the world has seen. But as a lover, he would have placed himself in a false position. He never spoke of the softer passions, save with a jibe and a sneer.They were admirable things for the observer, excellent for drawing the veil from men's motives and actions. But for the trained reasoner to admit such intrusions into his own delicate and finely adjusted temperament was to introduce a distracting factor which might throw a doubt upon all his mental results. Writ in a sensitive instrument, or a crack in one of his own high-power lenses,would not be more disturbing than a strong emotion in a nature such as his. And yet there was but one woman to him, and that woman was the late Irene Adler, of dubious and questionable memory. I had seen little of Holmes lately. My marriage had drifted us away from each other. My own complete happiness and the Holmes-centered interests which rise up around a man who first finds himself master of his own establishment,was sufficient to absorb all my attention, while Holmes, who loathed every form of society with his whole bohemian soul, remained in our lodgings in Baker Street, buried among his old books, and alternating from week to week between cocaine and ambition, the drowsiness of the drug, and the fierce energy of his own keen nature. He was still, as ever, deeply attracted by the study of crime,and occupied his immense faculties and extraordinary powers of observation in following out those clues and clearing up those miseries which had been abandoned as hopeless by the official police. From time to time I heard some vague account of his doings, of his summons to Odessa in the case of the Trepov murder, of his clearing up of the singular tragedy of the Atkinson brothers at Trincomalee, and finally of the mission which he had accomplished so delicately and successfully for the reigning family of Holland. Beyond these signs of his activity, however, which I merely shared with all the readers of the daily press, I knew little of my former friend and companion. One night, it was on the 20th of March, 1888, I was returning from a journey to a patient, when my way led me through Baker Street. As I passed the well-remembered door, which must always be associated in my mind with my wooing, and with the dark incidents of the study in scarlet, I was seized with a keen desire to see Holmes again, and to know how he was employing his extraordinary powers. His rooms were brilliantly lit, and even as I looked up, I saw his tall, spare figure pass twice in a dark silhouette against the blind. He was pacing the room swiftly, eagerly, with his head sunk upon his chest and his hands clasped behind him. To me, who knew his every mood and habit, his attitude and manner told their own story. He was at work again. He had risen out of his drug-created dreams and was hot upon the scent of some new problem. I rang the bell and was shown up to the chamber which had formerly been in part my own. His manner was not effusive. It seldom was, but he was glad, I think, to see me. With hardly a word spoken, but with a kindly eye, he waved me to an armchair, threw across his case of cigars, and indicated a spirit case and a gasogen in a corner. Then he stood before the fire and looked me over in a singular introspective fashion. "Wedlock suits you," he remarked. "I think, Watson, that you have put on 7.5 pounds since I saw you." "7," I answered. "Indeed, I should have thought a little more, just a trifle more, I fancy, Watson. And in practice again, I observe. You did not tell me that you intended to go into harness. Then how do you know?" "I see it, I deduce it. How do I know that you have been getting yourself very wet lately, and that you have a most clumsy and careless servant girl?" "My dear Holmes," said I, "this is too much. You would certainly have been burned had you lived a few centuries ago. It is true that I had a country walk on Thursday and came home in a dreadful mess, but as I have changed my clothes, I can't imagine how you deduce it. As to Mary Jane, she is incorrigible, and my wife has given her notice. But there, again, I fail to see how you work it out." He chuckled to himself and rubbed his long, nervous hands together. "It is simplicity itself," said he. "My eyes tell me that on the inside of your left shoe, just where the firelight strikes it, the leather is scored by 6 almost parallel cuts. Obviously, they have been caused by someone who has very carelessly scraped round the edges of the sole in order to remove crusted mud from it. Hence, you see, my double deduction that you had been out in vile weather, and that you had a particularly malignant boot-slitting specimen of London slavery. As to your practice, if a gentleman walks into my room smelling of iodoform, with a black mark of nitrate of silver upon his right forefinger, and a bulge on the right side of his top hat to show where he has secreted his stethoscope, I must be dull, indeed, if I do not pronounce him to be an active member of the medical profession." I could not help laughing at the ease with which he explained his process of deduction. "When I hear you give your reasons," I remarked, "the thing always appears to me to be so ridiculously simple that I could easily do it myself. Though at each successive instance of your reasoning I am baffled until you explain your process, and yet I believe that my eyes are as good as yours." "Quite so," he answered, lighting a cigarette, and throwing himself down into an armchair. "You see, but you do not observe. The distinction is clear. For example, you have frequently seen the steps which lead up from the hall to this room." "Frequently. How often?" "Well, some hundreds of times." "Then how many are there?" "How many? I don't know." "Quite so. You have not observed, and yet you have seen. That is just my point. Now, I know that there are 17 steps, because I have both seen and observed. By the way, since you are interested in these little problems, and since you are good enough to chronicle 1 or 2 of my trifling experiences, you may be interested in this." He threw over a sheet of thick, pink-tinted notepaper which had been lying open upon the table. "It came by the last post," said he. "Read it aloud." The note was undated, without either signature or address. "There will call upon you tonight, at 7:15, it said. "A gentleman who desires to consult you upon a matter of the very deepest moment. Your recent services to one of the royal houses of Europe have shown that you are one who may safely be trusted with matters which are of an importance which can hardly be exaggerated. This account of you we have from all quarters received. Be in your chamber then at that hour, and do not take it amiss if your visitor wear a mask. This is indeed a mystery, I remarked. What do you imagine that it means? I have no data yet. It is a capital mistake to theorize before one has data. Insensibly, one begins to twist facts to suit theories, instead of theories to suit facts. But the note itself, what do you deduce from it? I carefully examined the writing and the paper upon which it was written. The man who wrote it was presumably well-to-do, I remarked, endeavoring to imitate my companion's processes. Such paper could not be bought under half a crown a packet. It is peculiarly strong and stiff. Peculiar, that is the very word, said Holmes. It is not an English paper at all. Hold it up to the light. I did so, and saw a large E with a small g, a P and a large G with a small t woven into the texture of the paper. What do you make of that? Asked Holmes. The name of the maker, no doubt, or his monogram, rather. Not at all. The G with the small t stands for Gesellschaft, which is the German for company. It is a customary contraction like our co. P, of course, stands for papier. Now for the EG. Let us glance at our Continental Gazetteer. He took down a heavy brown volume from his shelves. Aglo, Algonitz. Here we are. Agria. It is in a German-speaking country, in Bohemia, not far from Carlsbad, remarkable as being the scene of the death of Wallenstein, and for its numerous glass factories and paper mills. Aha, my boy, what do you make of that? His eyes sparkled, and he sent up a great blue triumphant cloud from his cigarette. The paper was made in Bohemia, I said. Precisely, and the man who wrote the note is a German. Do you note the peculiar construction of the sentence? This account of you we have from all quarters received. A Frenchman or Russian could not have written that. It is the German who is so uncourteous to his verbs. It only remains, therefore, to discover what is wanted by this German who writes upon Bohemian paper and prefers wearing a mask to showing his face. And here he comes, if I am not mistaken, to resolve all our doubts. As he spoke, there was the sharp sound of horses' hoofs and grating wheels against the curb, followed by a sharp pull at the bell. Holmes whistled. A pair, by the sound, said he. Yes, he continued, glancing out of the window. A nice little brougham and a pair of beauties. 150 guineas apiece. There is money in this case, Watson, if there is nothing else. I think that I had better go, Holmes. Not a bit, Doctor. Stay where you are. I am lost without my Boswell, and this promises to be interesting. It would be a pity to miss it. But your client, never mind him. I may want your help, and so may he. Here he comes. Sit down in that armchair, Doctor, and give us your best attention. A slow and heavy step, which had been heard upon the stairs and in the passage, paused immediately outside the door. Then there was a loud and authoritative tap. Come in, said Holmes. A man entered who could hardly have been less than 6 feet 6 inches in height, with the chest and limbs of a Hercules. His dress was rich with a richness which would, in England, be looked upon as akin to bad taste. Heavy bands of astrakhan were slashed across the sleeves and fronts of his double-breasted coat, while the deep blue cloak, which was thrown over his shoulders, was lined with flame-colored silk and secured at the neck with a brooch, which consisted of a single flaming beryl. Boots, which extended halfway up his calves, and which were trimmed at the tops with rich brown fur, completed the impression of barbaric opulence which was suggested by his whole appearance. He carried a broad-brimmed hat in his hand, while he wore across the upper part of his face, extending down past his cheekbones, a black vised mask, which he had apparently adjusted that very moment, for his hand was still raised to it as he entered. From the lower part of the face he appeared to be a man of strong character, with a thick hanging lip and a long straight chin suggestive of resolution pushed to the length of obstinacy. You had my note, he asked with a deep harsh voice and a strongly marked German accent. I told you that I would call. He looked from one to the other of us, as if uncertain which to address. Pray take a seat, said Holmes. This is my friend and colleague, Dr. Watson, who is occasionally good enough to help me in my cases. Whom have I the honor to address? You may address me as the Count von Kram, a Bohemian nobleman. I understand that this gentleman, your friend, is a man of honor and discretion, whom I may trust with a matter of the most extreme importance. If not, I should much prefer to communicate with you alone. I rose to go, but Holmes caught me by the wrist and pushed me back into my chair. It is both, or none, said he. You may say before this gentleman anything which you may say to me. The Count shrugged his broad shoulders. Then I must begin, said he, by binding you both to absolute secrecy for 2 years. At the end of that time, the matter will be of no importance. At present, it is too much to say that it is of such weight it may have an influence upon European history. I promise, said Holmes. And I. You will excuse this mask, continued our strange visitor. The august person who employs me wishes his agent to be unknown to you, and I may confess at once that the title by which I have just called myself is not exactly my own. I was aware of it, said Holmes dryly. The circumstances are of great delicacy, and every precaution has to be taken to quench what might grow to be an immense scandal and seriously compromise one of the reigning families of Europe. To speak plainly, the matter implicates the great house of Ormstein, hereditary kings of Bohemia. I was also aware of that, murmured Holmes, settling himself down in his armchair and closing his eyes. Our visitor glanced with some apparent surprise at the languid, lounging figure of the man who had been no doubt depicted to him as the most incisive reasoner and most energetic agent in Europe. Holmes slowly reopened his eyes and looked impatiently at his gigantic client. If your Majesty would condescend to state your case, he remarked, I should be better able to advise you. The man sprang from his chair and paced up and down the room in uncontrollable agitation. Then, with a gesture of desperation, he tore the mask from his face and hurled it upon the ground. You are right, he cried. I am the king. Why should I attempt to conceal it? Why, indeed, murmured Holmes. Your Majesty had not spoken before I was aware that I was addressing William Gottfried Sigismund von Ormstein, Grand Duke of Castelfelstein and hereditary king of Bohemia. But you can understand, said our strange visitor, sitting down once more and passing his hand over his white forehead. You can understand that I am not accustomed to doing such business in my own person. Yet the matter was so delicate that I could not confide it to an agent without putting myself in his power. I have some incognito from Prague for the purpose of consulting you. Then pray consult, said Holmes, shutting his eyes once more. The facts are briefly these. Some 5 years ago, during a lengthy visit to Warsaw, I made the acquaintance of the well-known adventuress, Irene Adler. The name is no doubt familiar to you. Kindly look her up in my index, Doctor, murmured Holmes without opening his eyes. For many years, he had adopted a system of docketing all paragraphs concerning men and things, so that it was difficult to name a subject or a person on which he could not at once furnish information. In this case, I found her biography sandwiched in between that of a Hebrew rabbi and that of a staff commander who had written a monograph upon the deep-sea fishes. Let me see, said Holmes. Born in New Jersey in the year 1858. Contralto. The Scala. Prima donna Imperial Opera of Warsaw. Yes. Retired from operatic stage. Living in London. Quite so. Your Majesty, as I understand, became entangled with this young person, wrote her some compromising letters, and is now desirous of getting those letters back. Precisely so. But how? Was there a secret marriage? None. No legal papers or certificates? None. Then I fail to follow your Majesty. If this young person should produce her letters for blackmailing or other purposes, how is she to prove their authenticity? But there is the writing. Forgery. My private note paper, stolen. My own seal, imitated. My photograph, bought. We were both in the photograph. Oh dear, that is very bad. Your Majesty has indeed committed an indiscretion. I was mad, insane. You have compromised yourself seriously. I was only Crown Prince then. I was young. I am but 30 now. It must be recovered. We have tried and failed. Your Majesty must pay. It must be bought. She will not sell. Stolen, then. 5 attempts have been made. Twice burglars in my pay ransacked her house. Once we diverted her luggage when she travelled. Twice she has been waylaid. There has been no result. No sign of it? Absolutely none. Holmes laughed. It is quite a pretty little problem, said he. But a very serious one to me, returned the king reproachfully. Yes, indeed. And what does she propose to do with the photograph? To ruin me. But how? I am about to be married. So I have heard. To Clotilde Lothman von Saxe-Meiningen, second daughter of the King of Scandinavia. You may know the strict principles of her family. She is herself the very soul of delicacy. A shadow of doubt as to my conduct would bring the matter to an end. And Irene Adler threatened to send them the photograph, and she will do it. I know that she will do it. You do not know her, but she has a soul of steel. She has the face of the most beautiful of women and the mind of the most resolute of men. Rather than I should marry another woman, there are no lengths to which she would not go. None. You are sure that she has not sent it yet? I'm sure. And why? Because she has said that she would send it on the day when the betrothal was publicly proclaimed. That will be next Monday. Oh, then we have 3 days yet, said Holmes with a yawn. That is very fortunate, as I have 1 or 2 matters of importance to look into just at present. Your Majesty will, of course, stay in London for the present. Certainly. You will find me at the Langham under the name of the Count von Cram. Then I shall drop you a line to let you know how we progress. Pray do so. I shall be all anxiety. Then as to money, you have carte blanche. Absolutely? I tell you that I would give one of the provinces of my kingdom to have that photograph. And for present expenses, the king took a heavy chamois leather bag from under his cloak and laid it on the table. There are £300 in gold and 700 in notes, he said. Holmes scribbled a receipt upon a sheet of his notebook and handed it to him. And Mademoiselle's address? He asked. Is Bryony Lodge, Serpentine Avenue, St. John's Wood. Holmes took a note of it. One other question, said he. Was the photograph a cabinet? It was. Then good night, Your Majesty, and I trust that we shall soon have some good news for you. A good night, Watson, he added, as the wheels of the royal brougham rolled down the street. If you will be good enough to call tomorrow afternoon at 3 o'clock, I should like to chat this little matter over with you. 好啦，呢個第一個故事第一節就讀完啦。見到呢一個作者 Arthur Conan Doyle 同 Agatha Christie 嗰個手法就真係截然不同啦。Agatha Christie 嘅豐富就係在於嗰個人物嘅感情描寫啦，佢嘅心情啦，佢感情啦，嗰個人物關係嘅描寫。呢個 Arthur Conan Doyle 咧就相對起上嚟咧就係佢主要係圍繞住 Sherlock Holmes 啦，描寫佢嘅能力嗰個節奏嗰個對話，同我哋現今 BBC 睇到嘅描寫咧係真係好接近啊！嗰個節奏係極度之快。係令我覺得不可思議，因為喺嗰個年代竟然係由文字度睇到一啲咁 sharp 嘅節奏咧，呢個係令我始料不及嘅。即係我以為佢呢一種嘅跳躍式思考啊，佢嗰種語氣啊，佢嗰種反應啊，佢嗰種可以甚至話佢冷漠啊、純思考型啊、摒棄感情啊呢一種形象，我以為係加工啊，點知原來唔係。即係作者係由第一篇寫呢一個 Sherlock Holmes 開始，佢已經好確定咁樣寫出咗呢個角色，佢嘅思考方式，佢嘅住所嘅環境，佢服食啲乜嘢啊，食藥啊，對於婚姻嘅睇法啊，解謎啊，所有嘢其實佢已經好清晰啦，好清晰啦，同埋非常之豐富係在於佢會加入咗好多地方名啊、物件啊、名詞啊，佢令到成個畫面好豐富啦嚇。呢個比起 Agatha Christie 仲更加豐富啦。當然啦，喺呢個 Sherlock Holmes 當然係嗰個年代嘅超級英雄啦嚇，佢寫到佢係即係近乎神嘅程度啦。咁呢個係 Agatha Christie 未必會做嘅嘢，亦都唔會做嘅嘢。相對喺呢兩個作者呢，我暫時就係有呢種感想。咁故事方面呢，當然啦，誇張嘅，絕對係一個一國之君嚟揾 Sherlock Holmes 去解謎。仲有一樣就係、我都好意外，所有文字都係經 Watson 嘅口啦，亦都係由佢嘅視覺去講啦。而一開始原來已經 address 咗 Watson 已經結咗婚啦，一個結咗婚嘅人又回望翻去呢一個昔日嘅朋友，一個共事者嘅一個角度，即係佢嗰種感覺係令我覺得佢哋係兩個係有過去嘅，但係個故事只不過係啱啱開始，佢已經寫到佢哋係有好多過去，然之後佢哋已經分別咗一段時間又再重逢嚇，佢係用一種咁樣嘅手法去寫，咁啊再加強咗嗰個佢哋嗰種嘅羈絆啦，佢哋嗰種關係啦咁樣。咁呢一節有相當多嘅字，其實係可以同大家分享，因為好多名詞，但係名詞我就會少啲同大家分享啦。咁我可以分享啲大家有機會用到嘅字啦。Abhorrent 啦 ，Abhorrent 都幾常用嘅。Abhorrent 嗰個 H 咧，英文嘅發音，英國人嘅發音咧，個 H 係會 silent 咗嘅。Abhorrent， 美國人可能會 Abhorrent 呢個就睇下咩地方啦。但英國多數都係 Abhorrent， 佢意思即係 inspiring disgust or loathing、repugnant 令人好憎惡嘅。文中點樣用咧？就係話 Sherlock Holmes 咧近乎係憎惡呢啲感情用事。愛咩關懷啊呢啲咧，佢係唔中意嘅。佢呢個咁寫嘅 ，all emotions that and that one particularly， 即係 the love to Irene Adler were abhorrent to his cold, precise but admirably balanced mind。已經係喺文中嘅第一段落已經咁寫佢啦，所以係非常確立咗佢一個人物性格嘅。我睇 BBC 嘅 Sherlock Holmes， 我以為係加工，原來我係千錯萬錯。呢個完全100% 係作者嘅意思嚟嘅。Gibe G-I-B-E Gibe an insulting or mocking remark a taunt 一啲嘲諷啦，嘲諷嘅説話啦。Gibe 咧同 G-I-B-E 同 J-I-B-E 係相通嘅。J-I-B-E 我相信比較常用啲嘅。Gibe 咁呢啲都係形容 Sherlock Holmes 啦，對於一啲小興趣啊，有啲咩佢會嘲諷啦，因為佢認為呢啲都係會 distract 佢嘅嘢嚟嘅。Effusive 啦 ，Effusive showing or expressing gratitude, pleasure or approval in an unrestrained or heartfelt manner， 好熱情嘅或者好打開心扉咁樣好開誠咁樣去一種感情啦。點樣講咧？點樣用咧？咁文中咧就話 Watson 好耐冇見 Holmes 啦，而家 Holmes 一見翻 Watson， 佢嘅反應，佢就話Watson 就翻去上去 Baker Street 度諗住見一見Sherlock Holmes 啦，咁耐冇見。佢話 I rang the bell and was shown up to the chamber which had formerly been in part my own， 即係佢都講到係佢以前都有住喺嗰度，同佢一齊住。跟住 Sherlock Holmes 係點反應咧？見翻 Watson，his manner was not effusive ，it seldom was，but he was glad I think to see me。OK， 即係講一大堆，即係已經係覺得佢兩個人之間有一種咁樣嘅 tension 喺度，已經覺得都幾搞笑、幾可愛，亦都係 BBC 冇誇張到嘅嘢。佢哋兩個真係作者筆下已經係一種咁有啲曖昧嘅關係。令我覺得非常，即係作者原來係咁清晰嘅對佢要寫嘅嘢，令我覺得好感動啊！即係佢咁堅決、咁清晰諗到個人物，然之後寫出嚟，非常之佩服。OK， 第一節講完，我哋下一節同大家見面。